You don't have to know this. The denying power outlets wouldn't be working.
Which one? Orange one?
That one. And that's,
No, I don't. But Hunter, you can plug into the same power that we're plugged into if you need to. There's a power outlet behind the wall. Maybe a little damage too. You say his number 2. That was. That's not him. He's got some now. You got it?
yeah.
Great.
It sounded a little echoey, so I may have to kill.
Well, you got to kill
Mike's.
You need to kill your audio on your computer.
Oh, cool. Great. Thank you.
Maybe 22 throw it.
Okay. We're going to get going. Thanks for being here, everybody. I want to thank people that are here in person and via the live stream. If you're here in person and you haven't signed in yet, please do so before you leave, just so we can track that. And I've got a few housekeeping things to go through here, so I'm going to just read off of this just to make sure I get it all. But we're going to get started here. My name is Hunter Gullickson. I'm the Accessibility Manager here at the Guthrie. I'm also a board member of the Minnesota Access Alliance. And on behalf of the Access Alliance, I welcome you to today's presentation. Accessible Programs and Services for Visitors who are blind or have low vision. I want to thank the Access Alliance, the Minnesota Historical Society, the Minnesota State Arts Board, Paradigm Reporting and Captioning, the staff of the Guthrie Theater, and all the individuals that have made this event possible today. We are recording this, and we'll post it on the Access Alliance website in the near future. The format that we use today is that each presenter will talk for 5 to 10 minutes each. We'll go down the line, and then once we get through that section, we'll open it up for discussion and questions. If you are here in person, I ask that you wait to get a microphone before asking any questions. The reason for this is it's not about how you feel using a microphone, but really about how others can best hear. All right, if you're on the live stream, everybody should be muted. Feel free to use that chat feature to engage with each other, and I'll try to monitor that in the comments as we go along and ask questions from there for the panelists as well. And then we would appreciate feedback. So if you don't mind filling out a survey after the presentation today, it's important to just let us know how we're doing and then help us determine future topics that we talk about. All right, I'd like to acknowledge as well that we gather here on the traditional land of the Dakota people and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations, including the Ojibwe and other indigenous nations. Finally, take care of yourself as you leave. If you need to take a phone call, or if you need to leave early, you can do that without feeling any shame. Communicate in a way that's comfortable for you. I invite questions, differences of opinion, plurality of voices. If you need to use our restrooms, just down the hall, take a left. There are 2 gender neutral bathrooms halfway down on the right. All right, here we go. Our panelists today. We have Debbi Hegstrom, Laurie Lijewski, Samantha Smingler, Michael Malbert, and Laurie Pape Hadley. And I'll begin by asking you all to introduce yourselves, share a little bit about who you are and what you do, as well as telling us something or some reason that brings you to this panel.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. So I'm Debbi Hegstrom. My title is Senior Educator, part of the Learning Innovation Division, formerly known as Education, at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. I've been there for 22 years, and so my start down this path really began when I started at MIA. Throughout those 22 years, I've worked with many different organizations in helping create access to our programs, to our galleries. One memory that comes back to me is early on training. I work with our docent program, and one of the first trainings related to access that I went to brought in Rachel Parker from PACER and Carol Barnett from Jewish Family Services to work with our docent group on touch tours and other kinds of issues for people with disabilities. So I have really benefited from all the years of interaction with various people in this community.
I'm Laurie Lijewski, and my, background in terms of audio description, I am a patron here at the Guthrie. I have season tickets and have had for years. I also work in the field of accessibility, and so have a background there. And I think the experience that sort of got me started, so as a person who's blind, one of the things that I would say is that often before audio description, we would use deduction. We'd figure things out. And as Debbie mentioned, Carol Barnett was one of the original patrons who helped get this program started, and then Rachel Parker came in after that. And so when I started, this is 25 years ago or more, with the Guthrie and audio description, it would think, you know, I've done just fine, why do I need this? Well, the incident that really changed my mind, and you think it's a small thing, but it really isn't. So I went to see A Christmas Carol, and it was one of the first, if not the first, described performance. And in one of the scenes, there was a scene where Scrooge lights a candle, and I'd read the book many times. I had seen the play and seen the movie, but I didn't know that. And even though that seems like a small thing, when you think that that takes place, or that story took place in the 1800s, and they didn't have an electricity, that was kind of an important detail. So I kind of learned from that there were things I was missing, and they were important things. And so from that point, I've made my sort of audio described journey to the point where I am now, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as the day goes on, but I would say it's become a passion for me. So on that,
My name is Samantha Smingler, and I'm the inclusion coordinator at Great Lakes Aquarium, which is located in Duluth, Minnesota. So I am from the north. No, I'm just kidding. But for me, so I started off in secondary education. I taught high school biology before I moved into the aquarium and sort of museum world setting. So differentiation, or making sure that all learners had excellent ways to access information, had been important to me. I was a child who grew up with an IEP and did succeed very well in school, but because of the supports that had been put in place for me. So it was critical to me that everyone with an IEP, or the ones who didn't have one but should have, had access to things in my classroom and were engaged. And that really probably took it to the next level. I've been at the aquarium for 7 years now, having come from the East Coast, and after a car accident, sustaining a traumatic brain injury that highly affected my own vision, not being able to see things when I was moving or if they were moving. Progressed, it's improved quite a bit now, but going from being in a space that is extremely visually engaging to being overwhelmed in just a few moments in the aquarium, a place that I used to be in all the time, it really rung through for me that there was a lot that we needed to do to make a space that was so visual still as equally meaningful and engaging for someone with vision loss. So I would say my own vision loss really propelled me into this world of making things more tactile and making things more well described, because I went from a place of taking in visual information all the time for granted and having to close my eyes for hours and days at a time because I just couldn't process it. So I knew very much that I was missing things. I'm like Laurie said, like I knew I was missing it. So this has just been really exciting for me. And every time I work with someone and do more description or do something else that's tactile, it just burns my fuel even higher. And I'm like, okay, what's the next level? Like, let's keep going. So I'm excited to share some of the journey that I've been on.
Hello. Let's see, can you hear me? I think you can. Unfortunate for you guys, but what do you do? So my name is Michael Malver, and accessibility has been important to me before I really knew what the term accessibility was. But currently I work with the, kind of indirectly with the Secretary of State to advocate for accessible vote by mail. Right now, a blind person cannot vote through vote by mail unless they tell somebody what they're, who they're voting for so they can mark the ballot. So we're working on a process to make that accessible. I work with ensuring that websites can be used by people with disabilities. And I advocate for audio description, which is not only important to the people who are blind, I think, but also important to everyone else. Before such a thing as audio description existed, I knew that I was missing things, and I was going to get those things. And what that basically meant was that I would, sit next to a friend in the theater, and they would whisper to me and tell me what was going on. And though they tried to be quiet, it definitely, on occasion, would bother the people around me. And I somehow had to politely say, I'm sorry I'm bothering you, but I have just as much right to this, to consume this thing. It's not that I knew at 11 years old how to say, I have as much right to consume this as you do. But that's what it amounted to. Like, I want to watch this movie and understand it as much as you guys are watching it and understanding it. So it really was a revolutionary thing to be able to walk into somewhere like the Guthrie and be handed a little box and be told, hey, here's a headphone, and you don't have to ask what's going on because that's going to be given to you. I don't remember even how I discovered audio description anymore, but I've been on and off watching shows here since the early thousands. And then that same being able to not have to disrupt people came to the movie theater in the 2000s. It was always hit and miss. There were mechanical challenges in the beginning. Sometimes companies were a little, shall we say, not embracing of the new technology. But every so often, you'd be able to see something audio described. And I would joke to my friends that we blind people in the beginning of audio described movies were like sort of the absolute stooges, because we would watch any old crap that you would describe just because we could. Now there are so many described movies that I actually can be discerning and say, this is what I want to see. And in fact, it is to the point where if the Academy Award, when the nominees come out and there isn't a movie that's described, at least in my mind, it tends to stand out more because it's really becoming embraced. And it's just a wonderful time to be alive, and especially here in Minnesota. I think even as you guys are here learning, all you have to do is look at the state of audio description in other states to know that we are a pretty special state here. Anyway, so that's me.
Hi, I'm Laurie Pape Hadley, and I am an audio describer. I started working in vision access services, oh, it's been at least 30 years ago. And then that was for a fellow student before ADA was around, and we had professors who would say, Braille, what do you mean? I would read her textbooks to her, her course materials. When our classes didn't conflict, I would come along with her in class and make sure that she had the information that everybody else in the classroom had. And then a few years later, I think it's been 25 years, I was in the second group of people that the Guthrie trained with those core folks that have been mentioned, Carol and Rachel and Molly, as contributors to help us develop the program here. And then the Guthrie and DSA were fabulous in that we had grants and things available to us so that we have AD kits that are loaned out to the community. We are able to go to a local theater and make sure that they can have a described performance, and the Guthrie make sure that that equipment is here for them, for us to take out and bring back to them. So I'm very vocal advocate, and I also right now I'm currently working with the audio description project from the American Council of the Blind has said they want to start looking at certification. So I've been doing this for over 25 years and we've never had a certification process. And I've had people who come to me from boards and different theaters and saying, how do I know that someone who's presented themselves to me is a describer? So we're working on the certification process right now. And we've got people from Canada and North America, and then other folks that have either worked in or worked with countries or are from countries, like around 38 countries. So I'm very passionate about this work. I still have the that fellow student that I worked with. She's still with me. Every time I'm describing something, I think, what would she think of this, or she'd get a kick out of this. So that's always with me.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate that. There are a couple of things that came up that made me think about some things. And part of it is just the semantics of words that are used, because audio description is a term that's used a lot. But there's very similar things. Verbal descriptions, there's also different terms that are used for usage in movie. But the point is that it gets to the same thing. What is being provided? And so I don't want to get tongue-tied, as I'm doing right now, on the language that we're using. So we'll just use what's natural and talk about it just a little bit. And then, I think it's really important that we're representing different types of organizations here as well, which gets to that idea of being able to just go anywhere. And we'll kind of talk about that process a little bit as well. All right, Debbie, I'm going to turn it over to you. Talk about some of that work at the MIA and the process and working with staff and anything else you want.
Okay, thanks. So, and we call it MIA now. I don't know if you all know about that change. We've been doing touch tours for over 40 years, and so we have this process of all these objects. I have this list of curator-approved objects, and one of my challenges there is to always be talking to curators and saying, can we add new things to the list? Oh, there's nothing in our Chinese collection. What things can we make available? So we've been doing touch tours for many years, and then we started thinking about, and we often refer to it as verbal description, which is part of what's happening on the touch tour, where the docent that goes along is trying to give some really rich description of the object being touched. But we've also been looking for other ways to combine touch and verbal description. So I brought one of my goodie bags. So the tactile diagrams that Art Education for the Blind has advocated, are people familiar with these? So the work of art is on one side, and ideally you're in the gallery looking at this work of art together. And it's a kind of guided experience where the person who's blind is touching, the docent is giving instruction, but again, just trying to really make that painting come alive. Talk about the vividness of the colors, the gnarliness of the trees, whatever you can do to help that come alive. Now that's kind of an expensive process, and we had to have a special machine and, you know, or have someone work with that. So we thought, what can we do?
The people online want to see.
What can we do on our own? So we have I'm showing here a Cezanne painting with a lot of trees in it, which is similar to the Van Gogh painting with the trees, but these trees are very straight and upright. And so we've made these are kind of our homemade, we call them essence boards, where we're helping someone to be able to, you know, see that these trees are a different shape and they're a different kind of texture. So my docents just get together and have essence board days where here's a Frank Stella painting, which if you remember what a protractor is, it's his paintings were based on protractors. And so, you know, to be able to get what is a protractor, again, just creating a touch image that will give you those shapes. So when this has to do, you know, with when someone's there and they're taking a tour, but we also want to think about, well, what about via our website, or when someone isn't at the museum, what can we provide, what kind of access? And so then we started to think about writing and recording verbal descriptions. And I have a great group of docents, about 9 of my docents on an accessibility group panel that thinks about all of these things and says, well, why don't we just write some of our own? Why don't we train ourselves? We did have Rebecca McGinnis from the Metropolitan Museum come to MIA, and she did a session on verbal description for us. We started listening to verbal descriptions on other museum websites, and the end result is that we wrote 5 descriptions. We're fortunate to have an in-house recording booth, so we could actually, the docents recorded those descriptions, and now those are available on our website. So if you search on the MIA website for verbal description, those will come up. And they're things from our permanent collection that we feel are pretty much always out. It's a combination of painting and sculpture. The works come from different parts of our collections, our Chinese collection, our classical, modern art, African, so we wanted that variety. And so that's something that you could choose to listen to on your own at home. But if you wanted to listen in the museum, we have also loaded those on an iPod. So we have an iPod filled with little short audio descriptions for a lot of the items in our collection. But now these longer verbal descriptions are available through a separate icon. And we've struggled with length, and that's something I'm wanting to know more about. Ours are 7+ minutes. I'm going to be doing some testing with people to just see how long would they like to stand in front of a work of art and listen to information about it, and what level of information do they want? Do they want mostly about the work of art, or do they want something about the artist, a combination? So we're in the beginning stages, and we're having a lot of fun with this, and we're learning a lot through putting that out there and getting some responses from people. Do I have time to address briefly? So I was asked about institutional buy-in, and how do you get your institution to really support what you're doing? So we have had an accessibility team at the museum, not as long as I've been there, I'd say maybe within the past 15 years or so. But the thing that I think that's important about it is it has members from almost every division in the museum. So a facilities person, human resources, media and technology, visitor experience, curatorial affairs, press and public relations. That group gets together monthly, and we have these discussions. We can be supportive of one another in the things we're trying to do, and bring that to our leadership team then and say, have you thought about this? This is something we'd really like to advocate for at the museum. One other thing. So I was asked a question, so what do you do? Because, you know, docents are scheduled and they're not just sitting around waiting for people to show up. So what if someone wants to visit the museum and it's not a tour time and docents aren't available? We have created what we're calling our 3D bag, and we've been creating with a 3D printer some objects in our collection. This is the head of a bronze owl. There's a little one. That head does not go on that one. It's a big head. There's the little head. You know, these are small, and we've been asked to make bigger ones. So we're in the process of trying to figure out one more dog. What we can do to create an experience in front of a work of art where someone can actually, these are things that can't be touched. We're making them for objects that cannot be touched. What can we do to make that a better experience so that you can get a sense, like with this dog, with his perky ears and his upturned tail. Do you want to know this one, Laurie? It's a little Mexican dog based on a ceramic work in the collection. Sure. One other thing we're working on, this is very small, but it's working with carving into wood, something that is a relief carving from an object. So we have a desk that has all kinds of different implements and objects carved into it. And this is quite small. I have a bigger one that I didn't bring, but again, just something that can provide some information. This one is harder because it's so small, but I'll pass it down.
Are you getting these get passed around the room?
I am. Right here. So I guess the only other thing I'll say is we're quite aspirational. We're always trying to find other things that we can work on, that we can do. Someday I hope we have some bronze sculptures that people can touch without gloves. That's one of my great hopes.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, Lally, I'm sure you have many experiences you can talk about, but we're going to turn it over to you now.
Okay. So before I start with what I had planned to say, I just want to kind of dovetail on what Debbie has talked about. So actually, I'm going to do it before and after, I think. So about, I think it was 2005, I took this is back when the Minnesota Zoo had a dolphin pod, and I took a trip to the zoo, and at that time they were doing what they called dolphin encounters. They didn't have described at that time tours that you could take. They didn't really have much of anything. And so because it's laid out the way it is, and they've actually done a lot even since then to change the exhibit, you are the one that's sort of in the cage and the animals are not, which is probably the right thing to do there. But the thing that happened was that you, as a patron of the zoo, you really didn't know what was happening. There was no description. So it was really not worth going. But this was a hands-on experience that they were offering. And so a friend and I decided that we would go. And I asked them to hire a describer. And they did. And so it was, the whole morning was, we spent kind of learning about dolphins and that sort of thing. We kind of met, basically, we were divided into groups, and the group I was with was one of the trainers, the describer, myself, and we got to interact with 2 of the 4 dolphins they had at the time, including touching them. They were very different, so that was interesting. And at the end of the experience, one of the things that happened, so it was great that this was there was a describer there, because for lots of reasons. I mean, there were a lot of things that happened, but this was one of those moments that you would miss. So I had a different dog at the time. She was with me, but she was in a side office, and she was kind of able to watch from the sidelines. The trainers didn't know how the dolphins would react or how she would react, and so they wanted to keep them separate. But at the end, the head trainer went over and got her, and she brought her to the edge of the pool. And they had a young dolphin who was about 4 years old at the time, and my dog was the same age. So this young dolphin had shown curiosity when we first walked into the pool. She made a sound that was like, "What's that? I've never seen one of those before." And so at that point, when she brought her over to the pool edge, the dolphin kind of came up to the edge and they looked at each other for what seemed like a minute. And then she turned around, swam away, picked up a toy, brought it back to the pool deck and set it beside my dog. And that was one of those experiences that was so amazing and powerful that you just don't want to miss. And so I was really grateful that they had hired a describer for that experience, as well as some other things. So to bring this up to date, we went out there again to the zoo this summer, a friend and I. And they've done a lot of what you're talking about. They have bronze sculptures outside of most of the exhibits now, which they didn't have before. So now you can actually see what the animals look like and feel like. They have kits, I call them. They have a different name for them, but basically they're boxes with different kinds of pelts in them. They have some live opportunities to touch certain animals that are program animals as well. So they've really come a long way since then and done just amazing work. And the person who did the tour for us is a docent who she's a zoo kid. She said she started going to zoo camp when she was 2. So she knew a lot about the animals. And so when we went, we got so much more information than anyone who was just going through the zoo might get. It was just fabulous. So that was a great experience. And kind of my job here is to kind of give a range of the kinds of things that audio description can do in different environments. So that's kind of one of the experiences. And then I'm going to move on a little bit to the area of work and industry. So one of the things that that is a challenge, I would say, is a lot of the time in both in state government, but also, which is where I work, but also in private industry, they want to use e-learning to do training and teaching. And e-learning tools are often either not accessible or you have to create workarounds. And so the market isn't providing right now what we need to be able to provide truly accessible e-learning. And it's very frustrating for the developers, extremely frustrating for them, because they know they have to comply with standards, but they don't exactly know how to work all the time with the tools that they've got. And sometimes there might be a tool that might do what they need, but it's really expensive. It depends on the environment you're in, whether they can afford it. So there's that. And so what they often end up doing is going to video. And the thing that happens with video is that we really see a need for really good writing. And that is something we could use a workshop on. Because we think about the voicing, we think often about the arts and what people need in terms of the arts. And that the arts are really the place that this got its start. But it's starting to really move into lots of different areas now. So challenges like when you're creating a video script, you want to try to write into the script what the description is. You have 3 ways you can do it. Write it into the script. You can create a second audio track. And you have to have a player that can accommodate that. And there aren't a lot of them that really do a good job. And the third way is extended audio description, where you create the video and then you remediate. You go back and you create the second track, but how you do it is you freeze frame, insert the description, start the video, freeze frame, and it's annoying. So, but it is sometimes the way you have to do it. So we have one right now that at work that's what's happening with that, and it was the choice that got made. So the challenge that I'm seeing in my work environment is really being able to write concise, clear description that is a good narrative that gets the important things that you need to know, and there's a value judgment about that. What is the thing that you need to know? So if you have a video and you are describing something and you write it as the bare minimum to say, this is what so-and-so is doing, or this is what you need to do, rather than saying, so-and-so is doing this, and now they're doing this, and then they did this. And so you're describing the action rather than saying, kind of brushing over it and say, well, that's what they did, or you have to do this. Now, when you train, you really want to make sure that the person understands what's going on. And so say that you're describing how a form gets filled out. So you want to make sure that they understand what needs to happen. Well, if all you do is say, cross this out, instead of this person crossed out A and put B to correct the statement. So you then have a picture in your mind of what needs to happen when you get to that point in the form, as opposed to just kind of making it sort of a minimalist approach. So the challenge right now in a lot of places is how do you make video, how do you describe videos for a work environment that gets the message across, that doesn't stop people who are sighted from, that doesn't bore them, but still keeps it moving, and you keep within your time frame, and so you can see where the writing comes in. So that's a real need I see right now, is learning to write good description, and learning what's important, and learning not to make the value judgment for the person who's receiving the information. And that's a challenge because we have competing interests. So it's really important to be able to have that discussion, an honest discussion, and sometimes it's not going to come out necessarily as a user the way I want it to be, but I try to, in my situation, give my perspective and to try and educate folks who really want to do the right thing, who really mean well, but they don't understand how important this is. I think about how important is it for someone who is hard of hearing or deaf and needs captioning. So would you tell them what they need to know? Would you not tell them certain things? And sometimes examples might be, so if there's laughter in the audience, that often gets described. If there's applause, that gets described. If someone's deafblind, the interpreter might, there's a new thing that's happening in the deaf community, I think it's called protactile, and forgive me if the term is wrong, but basically what happens is the interpreter is able to give the recipient, the person with the disability, information by tracing on their back what maybe the expression on someone's face is, or I was just finished a book with about Hagen Gurman, and she's a deafblind woman who is the first person to graduate from Harvard with a law degree. And it talked about how the interpreter made a fluttering motion on her back to symbolize that there was laughter. So now people get that data. Well, so should people who are blind or visually impaired. And getting the message across to folks who don't understand why that's important is a challenge. So, and then in other environments besides work, I would say, I'm gonna look at my notes here so I'm not missing things. So often what that does, that kind of description fills in the gaps. It gives you information that you wouldn't otherwise have. And it might not be information that other people think is important, but it might be something that you think is important. So that's one area where I think there's work that needs to happen. And I think it's an area that really has been untapped at this point. So in another area that's really growing, and there's some interesting changes that are coming about as a result of this. There are two apps out now. One is called Be My Eyes, and the other is called Ira. And Ira is spelled capital A, capital I, capital R, capital A. So Be My Eyes and Ira. Be My Eyes is crowdsourced. But basically they do the same thing. One is a subscription service, the other is voluntary. It's a micro volunteer opportunity. So essentially what happens is that you have the app on your phone, you can call them up and you can ask the folks on the other end to describe to you anything that you want or need. So I have used it for all kinds of things. I've used it for events like this past summer, my nephew got married, and I used it at his wedding. And so I was having the describer describe the procession as the bridesmaids and groomsmen were coming out. And they kept coming. It was like 8 of them. And I started to laugh. About the 7th one came out, and the describer saying, and another one. And my nephew actually next to me, another nephew, and I were laughing at the same time. And we both turned to each other at the same time because I had this description going on in my ear and said, they just keep on coming. So that's one kind of experience, but a small thing. You might use them to read a label on a package. You might use them to read mail. Anything that you can imagine that you need to have done, I think of them as describers in a pocket. It is the most freeing thing that's happened in a while for people who are blind or visually impaired. The thing that has also happened with Ira in particular, Be My Eyes uses volunteers on the other end. So folks anywhere in the world, essentially, as long as they hook you up with people who speak your own language, which helps, because initially that wasn't happening, and that's a challenge. But in the experience of using this with Ira, it's a paid service, although they're working really hard to make free opportunities for people who can't afford it to use it. But they've trained their agents very highly. They get a lot of training going in, and then they continually seek to improve how they work. They're always monitoring them, always working to, striving to improve. They take good community input. And as a result of this, description is available to us in places it's never been before. And it's available sometimes for free, sometimes for a low cost, sometimes for high cost. Depends on what you can afford and what you want to spend. And for Be My Eyes, it's free. Again, the quality is a little different, but that's a choice. We now have a choice. We didn't before. And so with Ira, some of the things that are happening as a result of what they've done is that they've, I think, elevated description to a really professional level beyond the arts. So it's taken it out of the realm of the arts. You can use it at work if you can get your employer to pay for it. Some people have. You can use it, some people have even used it to have theater performances or watched a movie with them and spent their minutes. It's up to you how you choose to spend your time and your money. And so they say it's on your time, on your terms. which is a new thing. And so that's really one of the things that's changed. But beyond that, and carrying it further, we now are starting to see situations where we're thinking of a different paradigm. So we're moving from in a work environment, thinking about hiring us what we used to call a reader, and that person used to do a lot more than just read. But that's what the title of the job position was. Now we're starting to think, because this is a term of art that Ira has coined, visual interpreters. And the job is much more than reading. It has a lot more functions than that. And so we're starting to see that paradigm shift to where now in the workplace, these are starting to be positions that might be created in different ways for people, rather than just having someone on the staff fill that, where you're taking time away from other things they might do. That person is then dedicated to doing that work. And it's not like a full-time job, not yet, but it's new. And so this is another area where there's some branching out, and it's really Ira that's been the catalyst for this. And then the last thing, I'm taking up a lot of time, but the last thing I just want to share is one experience that had to do with a frustration that I had. I was watching a favorite show. I'm an Outlander book and series fan. And one of the shows, one of the episodes had about a 7-minute period at the end where there was maybe one sentence of dialogue and the rest was music. And I got really frustrated. So one day I posted on Facebook about this and said, is there anybody out there who watches and can tell me what happened? So a friend of mine from college, she's on my page, she saw the post. Her sister-in-law is a really like a super fan. So she connected us and explained the problem. And so her sister-in-law wrote out it. She watched the episode again. She'd already seen it, but she watched it again, wrote out a description, sent it to me via email. We got talking on the phone, and she said, I'd love to learn how to do this description thing. So we started out together. I have another friend in Denver who is also blind, and she got me started on the Outlander journey. And so the three of us connected, and then another friend who's in the audience, who's also a fan, got into the group, and the two sighted folks have taken on the task, and with gusto, I would say, of describing episodes to us, and we figured out a technical way to do it. We do it via FaceTime. Yes. And that's how we've managed, because the series is not described, that's how we've managed to get it done. So you just have to be a little creative.
Thanks, Lolly. There are a couple of things that really stood out that got me thinking about just application. One's the idea of making employment easier, which is a large issue to tackle anyway, but I'm glad that you talked about that. But then just being creative and coming up with solutions. Your Outlander story is just so great with that. All right, Samantha, you are up.
Awesome. I'm starting my timer, so you don't have to kick me off the stage. So one of the first questions is what's happening at the aquarium, and my list feels really long, but in some ways a huge piece of it was partnering with our local Lighthouse Center for Vision Loss, and that really kicked off having real users with vision loss to be able to come through our space and give us feedback of like, hey, I ran into all of the benches in this one exhibit. Cool, yeah, you're right. Those are dark gray benches and there's a navy blue floor. That sucks. Okay, we're gonna flip that. We can make those benches white. Can we fix the lighting in this area because it's too dark here. So we were trying to look at, we had started doing a ADA walkthrough to look at the physical aspects of the building. So we started kind of at that bare bones there to make sure we were meeting those standards. And then by bringing in focus groups to give us additional feedback, we had some more of those. Also just what are quote nice to haves, as some of my directors will say, and I continuously advocate for them to be necessary to have so that everyone can have an awesome experience. and getting just that real information, because when I said it, it just didn't mean anything. When I played the recording or showed them the typed notes of, here's what 3 different teenagers with low vision said as to why the gift shop was not accessible. And they're like, oh, okay. So getting that real feedback made a very big difference. And then really, you know, so we were really focused internally, and then I had to kind of pause and stop for a moment and go, yeah, but you can't even get to the aquarium because the closest bus stop is nearly a 15-minute walk, and it's over a highway. So it's not accessible for someone with low vision, someone who just doesn't like to jump in front of trucks, anyone with a stroller. Actually made a video of myself carrying a very large stuffed moose in a wagon. It was extremely convincing to the transportation authority. So sometimes you really have to show people what those challenges are in order to make a difference. So we were able to get a bus stop that is right across the street from the aquarium. So it's not at the front doors, but it's a massive improvement. And that allows our volunteers who are blind and with vision loss to be able to have a real way to get to the aquarium. We have worked at adding everything from during registration processes for our workshops and things like that, that there's a list of accommodations that can be that you can click that you'd like right at the beginning. And then really working with the Lighthouse to get Braille and things in Boston Braille, learning how to make audiobooks. So we now I also have a bag of tricks. So what I'm holding in my hand is a talking book player, and this is a device that is provided to someone with a visual disability, or actually I believe any disability with related to reading. And so the player has large buttons on it as well as Braille, and it allows you to listen to an audiobook. And so the cartridge that I'm holding up is what the book comes on, but in this case, I learned from the Lighthouse how to take the content that's on the exhibit walls, all of the signage that's in the space. We wrote an audio description summary. So what does it actually look like? Because when you first walk into the room, what are those wow moments that make you feel, oh my gosh, you're underwater and there's a giant scuba suit to my right and there's fish hanging from the ceiling and there's a giant shark in front of me. All of those things are really relevant when you first walk into a space. And then maybe you want to know what happens and what makes boats float and what makes them sink and why do sponges and corals and all the fish come into that area. So we're able to provide that. And then one of the, you know, and a lot of people have asked me, Samantha, why didn't you make an app? And I was like, do you have 50K? Because I don't. Yeah. And so this was an opportunity I was able to apply and get 3 of those players. You do have to purchase the cartridges, but they're anywhere between, you know, $10 and $15 depending on how large they are. And I have one for, we're making them for each exhibit. The other thing that's really nice is there's something called free matter for the blind. So I have essentially cartridge envelopes. And so even though the one that's in this player right now is for our Shipwrights Alive gallery, and it is a 20-minute audio, that's something you might be able to listen to. But as it was kind of mentioned before, I did select down to what is in that summary. So if you would like the full thing, it's going to take you a few hours to listen to. And so we're working with local Lighthouse readers to do the full recordings of our exhibits as well. And that free matter for the blind will allow you to take those home with you. So you'll be able to listen to them, download DAISY files off the website, but you'll also be able to take the cartridge with you. And when you're done listening to all of the exhibits, you'll be able to mail it back to the aquarium at no cost. And so I kind of worked within the systems that already existed within the disabilities community to make the content at the aquarium more accessible, because I didn't have the ability to do it in a fancy app. So I definitely come from a nonprofit world where creativity, and I love your pieces, and as Debbie mentioned, that heat raising printing is extremely expensive, but puppy paint is awesome and is like $3 at the craft store. So when you walk into the aquarium, there is a 2-story gigantic glass wall with water coming down it. It's something that everyone hears and it like sort of takes your breath away. It's very magnanimous, and So I wanted to take all of this, there's symbols all across the wall that have to do with water. So we printed each of those, I laminated it, I outlined each and every symbol in puffy paint, and we put the braille underneath of it. And so now that piece is something that is acceptable, like is accessible in so many different formats, and everyone has enjoyed seeing them up close because they're so large and they're sort of far away on the wall, but everybody can get up close to them in the binder that they're in. We've also, audio description I feel like comes up in lots of different ways. Not only can it be pre-recorded, we've actually, in our newest exhibit, built it in to the most recent exhibit. So when you get to our Raptor Ridge exhibit, there are 2 telephones. When you pick up the telephone, it is my voice, welcome to me again, and I will tell you all about what the exhibit looks like, as well as what the animals look like. And then if you press the button again, so you can skip that if you'd like, then it tells you more information about what's on the signage, and so how those animals are here, why they're rehabbed, and those kinds of stories of what their favorite foods are, you know, the things people like to know. So we were able to go from having to retrofit with like the player to being able to build it into the exhibits. But I would say the thing that we can't record is what the otters are playing with, because it's different every day and all day. And so one of the challenges that we had coming up into our space was thinking about how do we describe live animals and how do we capture in between what is never a scripted program. So at the aquarium, there are programs that happen throughout the day, depending on the audience. So if it's Tuesday morning and there are 35 2-year-olds, it looks a lot different than when there's a more adult audience or a more mixed family audience. So the audience really drives, in addition to do the divers show up on time? Is one of the otters not eating today because they get to choose? Or is, you know, or for some reason there are 300 third graders. And so every day the audience, the animals, and the person, we call them interpreters, but you have to think of it more as the educator, and the story that the individual educators tell is all different. So when we talk about audio describing a program, sure, the story the educator is telling is really, it's engaging, but the most exciting thing is what the otters are doing, or how the fish are interacting with the divers and sucking the mask off their face. That's how, let's see, that's the funny part, right? So if you miss that part, then it matters. And also there's a challenge because no one in Duluth is an audio describer. So what do? Well, sometimes you call Hunter and you ask for a friend and he sends you one, and it's amazing. But on a day-to-day basis, you can't bring someone up from the cities to audio describe all the time. So what I've been working with is taking our storytellers, taking our educators who already know, right, like who already know the art in Debbie's case, but in our case, they already know the animals, they know the individual animals as well as the natural history, and they know our exhibits and our space really well, and just turning their storytelling into being more and more descriptive. So we are now trying to start every single program that we do every single day of the week with an audio description of the exhibit. Because what we found is when I was doing the trial groups and I was specifically describing the exhibit to a group of people that I knew couldn't see it, is that everyone started coming over and being like, oh, this is a real place, it's modeled after a real thing. Oh, I didn't realize it was that deep. And everyone was interested in the information we had to share in painting that picture. And so that was sort of the win-win. We're like, oh great, okay, so it's not the special thing that Samantha is going to do for a special group, which is the worst thing. I hate that. So it's really about building it into everybody's role all the time. And just becoming more and more descriptive so that no programs are talking about the fish over there, but are describing the brightly colored rainbow trout with a pink stripe going down the side that you can see a group of 6 of over on the top right third quadrant of the tank. And so that helps everybody, regardless of the fact that it made it critical for some. It actually is just, it's the win-win across the board. So one of the other pieces that we have added, oh my gosh, I have to talk faster. Okay, All right, so that's kind of adding description into what we do all the time, as well as we are now offering what is called a tactile tour or a touch tour. And so in this particular case, if you have paid admission to the aquarium, there's no extra cost, and there's discounts for low income and all kinds of different things. There's no additional cost. The tour is about an hour. We make 5 stops. I have 2 different tours. How did I pick what was on the tour? It's a thing everybody posts on Facebook. Seriously, like the things that everybody posts on Facebook that is the coolest thing, those are the stops that we make. And then if you're like, okay, but I don't care anything about snapping turtles, but alligators make me sing, great, we'll meet an alligator instead. So I have the 5 vertebrates of Minnesota. So we make a mammal stop, a fish stop, a bird stop, an amphibian stop, and a reptile stop. Also, we're an aquarium, so I have a fish diversity tour where we look at the very differences between a lake sturgeon compared to a shark, compared to a jawless fish, which is a sea lamprey, compared to a seahorse. All vastly different kinds of fish with very different stories to tell. And the fun thing is, sort of like Laurie mentioned, is you get to blend the two. So I'm going to tell you stories about those animals as well as describing them and using tactile objects. So I have a couple. So sometimes really simply a plastic model that might be assumed even to be a toy, it can show really great details. So Michael, I'll put this in your hands. And so one of the first things I often hear when I put this in their hands, Michael, what's your first thing you notice?
The fin?
Sorry, this is an eagle.
Wings?
Yes, the fins. The fins are huge. Yeah, the fins are huge. The wings are huge, and that is something that when you see an eagle with outstretched wings is the first thing you notice. So one of the things I like about using tactile objects is that I don't always have to tell you everything. You can actually experience it and be a more authentic piece. The other thing that sometimes folks will notice with that one is it's got huge feet. Sure does have huge feet. So let's talk about talons. And then I have a talon that you can actually feel that's life size. And then also you can't have eagle wings, but you can have wings of other birds. And so you can show the structures of how a wing is built and that it has different kinds of feathers and allows someone to feel those pieces. I'm holding a wing of a pheasant. I'll put that in your hand. You get the next one. I should make you guess, Michael. Okay, you don't have to guess. A bear. Oh, a bear is a great guess. So this is the largest land mammal in Minnesota. So this actually belongs to a moose. So this is a winter moose hide. And so one of the things that's at the aquarium that happened to be like an accidental find, we were doing practice tactile tours with folks from the lighthouse, which was another amazing opportunity because we were able to get a huge diverse group. So everything from children to teens, college students, adults, and seniors, and then a wide mix of folks who had partial sight, some who had none, folks who had never had vision, and folks who lost their vision later in life. It was important for us to get a diversity because everybody walks through the door. And so we were actually going from one stop to the next, and we actually had folks almost nearly run into the moose statue and go, "What is this?" And I'm like, "Oh, don't hit your face on the antlers." And then they were like, and then I was like, "Actually, why don't you feel those? Why don't you tell me what you noticed?" And then the coolest thing to do in recognizing and having a model is to have a life-sized one. So there really wasn't anything better. So that caused me to reach out, and that moose hide is a donation of a hide from a researcher at the Natural Research Institute, and I have skulls and things that I just started asking, and as soon as you tell the story of, okay, I really need to make moose come alive, people are like, "Oh, I've gotta," and you're like, "Yes, I want that." So, so telling the story is really important too. The other thing I try to add is actual examples of, Caroline, I think it's your turn. Is pieces that are actually on the exhibit. So this is a piece of turf that we would use both as enrichment for river otters as well as it's on top of the perches for the raptors because it helps them grip the surfaces better. But to be able to describe, oh, it's like little pokey grass, but to be able to feel it is really something else. And you could see that if we put cinnamon or some sort of spice. I'll put this in your hands, Michael. That it would be something that otters could really push around and dig and play in. But being able to feel the things that are on exhibit and examples of enrichment has been something that's people are very interested in as well. Okay, staff training. When you work at a nonprofit, the last thing anyone wants to do is pay people to come in for more time and more training. Literally, they're like, is there any other possible way you could do this? And my answer is no, there's not. I really need the time, and the time matters because it's gonna make a difference. So how I got some of that buy-in and time with staff is I put dates on the calendar. And I said, this is when the focus groups are coming. For sure, I will have 15 people with little or no vision. And they cannot have a horrible experience. So we need time with our staff to make sure that they know what to do and how to support them. The touch pools are something that is an amazing opportunity at our space. Being able to touch a moon jelly, touch a shark, touch a horseshoe crab, touch a sea star, those are things that you don't get to do every day no matter who you are. And so making sure that our staff really knew how to offer, how to approach, how to not insult, but to also just be there. And some folks just need you to point out what's an animal and what's an exhibit piece. And some people really just need to know when the animal is coming up to the surface because it's hard to tell the depth perception. And others actually need you to do what we call a hand over hand, which is where you take your hand and you place it just under theirs and you move their hand gently. The thing is, you have to turn your narrator on because no one wants to put their hands into cold water very quickly up to elbow without a lot of information first, okay? So before I grab you and just get real excited to help you with the sturgeon, I've got to tell you about what's happening next. And so it took time learning and teaching our staff, and I made them all put blindfolds on and be in that position so that they had true empathy for what it would be like and why it was so important to have somebody come up to this side of the habitat to actually feel the water first and then to know what it would be like to put their hands into the water before they actually touch the fish. And our staff was like, no, I'm not going to tell them what it feels like. And I was like, okay, well, when you do that, it scares the crap out of people. So you do need to give them some idea of what's about to happen. And it will still be an authentic experience. And then you can still have that conversation. And also little things like, Michael might be really excited to touch a fish, but he doesn't want to hold my hand for 3.5 minutes while we wait for the next one to come up, right? So just all those little things and practicing it with folks is what gave us the idea. So having that, and then actually just this past Saturday, we did a huge event at the aquarium, experiencing the aquarium through touch and sound to really kick off all of these pieces that we have and to be able to, we had over 15 volunteers that day with tactile stations set up all over the aquarium with hundreds of items. We had every single program audio described that day, and then we had folks from the Lighthouse and the Lions Club doing awareness about resources in our community. So it was just a huge, awesome day to be at the aquarium if you were someone with vision loss, because everything was made tactile as much as we possibly could all at one moment. So, and we did have folks spend almost the entire day there from 10:30 to 4:30. We had folks who it really was their day, and it was really kind of incredible. So that, putting that date on the calendar also allowed me to get, I did 6 staff trainings for multiple departments, and that included volunteers as well as staff. It was also a really nice blend to see the community members as well as our own staff participating in those trainings. And by those trainings, I mean, it wasn't just me. I had experts from the Lighthouse, and at every single training, it was critical to me to have at least 1, if not 2 to 3 people with vision loss in the training. So they heard from someone whose lived experience was having partial or no vision. And that's because it meant so much more. Every single eval said, wow, that was incredible, and I will always do that or never do this thing, because I really got to hear it from somebody that it matters to. Do you want me to cover current obstacles later? Bye. Okay.
Yeah, we'll say that.
Thank you.
I just wanted, someone had pointed out, I just lost my power of the computer, I'll try and get it back up. But there's someone online that works at the Dakota County Libraries that had made a comment that there's free 3D printing in the libraries. So a great resource there. Yeah. All right, Michael, you are up.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, I can hear me. So I guess I come at audio description much more from the consumer angle of things. You know, I do the accessibility for the web that I mentioned, but much more of that is about the web itself and far less about audio description. There is still, you know, nobody mandates that YouTube videos need to be audio described. And so for the most part, they are not. There is a tool out there that allows anybody who wants to describe a YouTube video. It does it by having you pause the video and give a description and it continues to stop. It's not the sort of running commentary that you get with a normal professional thing, but it is doable, and it's nice when it happens. Laurie talked about technology, and I think it's important. I love technology in my world. Ira is definitely a game changer. The other day, I needed to touch up a resume, and they have a thing where you can call them for free for job skills related stuff. So I called them up and I gave them access to my computer, and they, you know, lined up some things and changed some spacing or whatever. Never had access to something like that before, so that's amazing. I read somewhere about an app called Gala that I would really love to see it work. That's supposed company that's trying to create an audio description / captioning solution for the theater, where the theater would have some kind of a homegrown intranet, or, you know, some sort of a internal network, and then you would connect to it and use the services. It looks really cool. All of this technology is really cool, but the problem with it is that it is technology. As much as I love technology in my life, and Laurie can tell you that technology has changed her world, not everybody wants to own an iPhone. Not everybody wants to use the complexity of Android. And therefore, and some people just don't know how, right? If you're 75 years old and you just suffered from, you know, what am I thinking of? RP, some sort of vision loss thing. And you're trying to just come to terms with how your life has changed. You're probably not sitting there going, wow, you know what I really need to do is learn how to use an iPhone in a new adaptive way so that I can get to work. So some of the people who most need these kinds of services are people who may not have access to their own technology. So I think it's really, really important for people to provide what's needed. And the Guthrie has been absolutely wonderful about lending their equipment out to other theaters, as I understand it. You know, so that somebody can just walk in and say, I want to watch this show, and they can do it. Audio description is definitely making its way into the mainstream. Netflix has quite a bit. Hulu has quite a bit. There is work to try and get HBO to start stepping up to the plate. I think one of the real challenges we have here in the United States is that people are willing, or maybe I should say corporations are willing to provide audio description when it is mandated because they know they have no choice. But it's really hard to get the above and beyond stuff to happen. You know, both Laurie and I, for different programs, Laurie for Outlander, myself for Game of Thrones, have written letters and it just said, look, we want to watch this as much as the next person, and can you please do this? And all I can say is Laurie's fortunate to find the network that she did. And unfortunate that she needed to find the network in the first place, you know. And it's still, things are not perfect. I went to see a movie that allegedly had audio description, a movie called The Current Wars. And it didn't have audio description. A week later, when I pulled up the movie theater website, they had pulled the label saying that it had description out of the site. They had made a mistake. you know, sure, I got my tickets back, but I maybe wouldn't have bought the popcorn and soda, you know, if I'd known I wasn't going to be able to fully engage with the show. None of you are movie theater people, but my point is, you know, you can say you're sorry, but when there's an investment involved, sometimes it still rankles a little bit. But all in all, audio description is pretty amazing. Getting access to it is pretty easy. Finding out where it is can be a challenge. And this is where having an accessible website can be so important. People don't necessarily, and you know, it used to be that a lot of blind people were involved in a couple of organizations, and you could go to those organizations and say, hey, there's something going on, our theater is doing this, and you should know about it. But with the decline in advocacy groups happening, although you can still reach out to them and should reach out to them, there's a whole pool of people that you're not going to reach. But just as with sighted individuals, we blind people are on Facebook and we are on Twitter. And so making sure that you have a web page, a Facebook page, you know, that clearly announces what your performances are and when the audio description is. If you really want to go above, and this is just my personal opinion, Braille is kind of expensive, but maybe you could put your program online so that I could download it and read it beforehand. That would be awesome, you know. Or making it available, I mean, available upon request is a little weird because it would never occur to me to ask for it. You know, but little things like that make a huge deal. If I come to a musical, I want to know what the songs are just as much as the next person. And Laurie, with all her great intentions, might say, all right, here's the 30 songs you're going to hear, you know, before the show. I'm not going to remember all 30 of those pieces of music. Might also be interesting to see for people doing operas if they could put their libretto online. You can get it other places, but it'd be great if the theater would say, here's the lyrics to the show and download it, whatever. Anyway, so I guess that's pretty much all I've got. And unless, when we get to questions, obviously, ask more.
Hunter wanted me to talk a little bit about the certification process that we've started. So after 25 years of this, I've had board members and different people walk up to me and say, how do I know if someone actually is trained and is actually able to do description? And we had the luxury in Minnesota of having the Guthrie take those patrons that came to them very seriously and worked with them as they developed audio description. And it kind of became the standard for the state. And then later on, we end up training different groups. For instance, Lanesboro Theater did a grant that I think VSA and the Minnesota State Arts Board were able to help them get the equipment. So the same kind of kit is there. And the folks that are in that theater community are they're very embedded and committed to that community. So they were able to, I went down and trained them, and then VSA took experienced listeners and experienced patrons down to give them feedback. So over time, we've had a very consistent style here in Minnesota, where in fact we're told we're a little bit more emotive than most of the United States, because originally the idea was we were supposed to be neutral. And there was a little bit of confusion about whether we're being emotive and expressing some of the action that's going on, like with children, and they need to understand there's some kind of activity that you can't always get in the moment to explain. There's not always time for words. ASL interpreters and AD interpreters. So we're trying to find some consistency with the certification process right now with Canada and the United States, and then also these other communities in worldwide, because the United Nations is looking at this as a human civil right. Canada's trying to meet 100% of their broadcast with description, and they're trying to get out ahead of existing TV series, so that there's a lot of discussion right now of trying to find, in the UK they do it slightly differently, in Minnesota we do it slightly differently, some consistency across the board, so that if somebody later wants to know, this person might really have a great understanding of description, but are they really a legitimate describer? And so the audio description program, the the audio description project with the American Council of the Blind is working with ACB rep out of Arizona. And they're actually the Academy for Certification of Vision Rehabilitation and Education Professionals. And they came out of the area of low vision therapy and orientation, mobility, and vision rehabilitation work, where somebody who maybe lost their sight needed to learn how to use a cane or how to do things in the home, things like that. So that came out naturally in this certification process. So certification was something that was coming, and we wanted to have a voice. Because we do so much here, we're not always, you know, it's Minnesotans. We don't necessarily tout our horn unless they come to see us and they go, huh, you guys do a lot here. We have that luxury with the Legacy Act and with organizations like VSA and the Guthrie loaning out the equipment. So right now we're in the process with the audio description subject matter expert group. And we literally started back in June, and there was a group that was doing the scope of practice and another group that's doing body of knowledge. And in these discussions with people that have done things across the United States for different types of things, they're finding out it's not just limited to theater, it's not just limited to people who have low vision or are blind. There are other people who are using it for, we have children on the Asperger's autism spectrum that are using a description. We have people who have unintentional blindness. I have a family member who actually cannot recognize faces. So things are, when they're being described, it's expanding. And the same way we saw captioning being developed in where somebody will be at a bar and they're watching something and they can watch it. It's being used by someone who doesn't necessarily wouldn't normally need captioning. It's expanding. So we really looked at that. We also have another group that's doing the body of knowledge work. Basically, what does a describer who's going to be a legitimate describer really need to know about the people that they're serving, about the services they're providing? What is one person's preference for description is not another's. I have someone who says to me, I really don't need to know about color. I haven't seen it my whole life. Maybe yellow. I like pineapple. They tell me it's yellow. And I have somebody else who's lost their vision over time who says color's important to me. Tell me about that. So you always have to make these decisions about best practices. And we're really exploring right now, like I said, the body of knowledge we need to know, the scope of practice, all the different areas we're covering, which a lot of folks, it's kind of knocking it's kind of blowing their minds that this is a bigger area than we realize we're covering between all of us. And the next phase that we're covering right now is code of ethics. So down the road, they think it's an 18 to 24 month process before we finish this. We will be figuring out what is kind of the knowledge base you need to have, and then we'll get to the point of determining, and how do you determine that somebody can actually do this? In my household, I had a 16-year-old who just took a driving test and a husband who learned how to drive a streetcar. Both of them aced the written part. Getting to the actual driving part and to the actual streetcar driving, it took a period of time. So when I was trained years ago at the Guthrie, we had some great, fabulous people that came in the training class with us who went through all of the process of vetting and auditions and practicing. And then when they got to the actual piece of watching a show and describing it, went, I'm not going to be comfortable with that. And we said, the patrons were like, are you kidding? You have to describe it. So right now with the certification process, they're really figuring out, this is a really large thing that we're covering here. And in 18 to 24 months, our goal is to come up with what will it take to have someone be certified. And then down the road, once we have the certification process, and again, this will require that describers, they have to pay the fees to get the certification, and we're in an arts form where we're independent contractors, and I love it, but we're undercapitalized overall. Everybody knows we're all trying to figure out how do we do that. So that's something that's coming down the road, and I've had a couple of organizations say to me, so how is that going to work? But down the road, eventually, the goal is that an organization can say, are you certified? Right now with Minnesota, because the Guthrie set the standard, we say to folks, check to see who trained them, how were they mentored, Are they getting regular feedback from the patrons and the people that use the services? Are they also, are they also listening to other describers? That's something you really want to find out. If, in the Guthrie can always give you referrals because they really kind of set the standard here. I also listen to anybody that I refer. I go and listen to them actively so that if someone says to me, I need someone and you're not available, we do that. So down the road, we want to have consistency. We want to have people to be able to have the ability to have success in achieving equity with the visual information that's out there so that they can have that info and decide like you or I when we're watching something, whether that information is important to them and how, how they want to process it or how they want to take it in. Let's see. Well, Lolly covered a lot about the audio content for the videos, and that's something that's also we've been talking about. Like we see this also happening with when people are doing audio description for, say, a university course, that sometimes we have to take that time with that extended information because there is just so much more information sometimes that can't be presented in the space of class. So that is something that if you are going to do audio on any of your videos, I think History Theater did something where they put together a video that was produced. Stacia Rice, who's a local actress who also used to have her own theater, she always, she did a fabulous radio spot once about Dancing with Lunasa that explained all the access services that they provided, and it was perfect because she basically let people on the radio know what was out there, and anybody could understand within that space of that commercial what those services were. So down the road, we really want to make sure that we're doing the best to make sure that the best quality is out there and the best consistency. And our hope is that we are setting a standard around the world so that somebody, I've had one person who tried it somewhere else and then it wasn't quite what they wanted. And then they came here to the Guthrie and tried it out in Minnesota. And suddenly they went to every theater that had description in the community. And you would see him all the time. He had people, would drive them up from Northfield. So we want to make sure that we're providing consistency, and we wanted Minnesota to have a voice in that certification process so that we could down the road, once we're getting that final certification established, we've got some standards in place that kind of match what people really want. And I think the last thing you wanted me to do was talk about some of the weirdest places I've described. Out on the Stone Arch Bridge, got a bad sunburn one day describing a live event. I've been in parks in the dark where the ASL interpreters literally had like this Dr. Seuss rig above them so they could be seen. And I was, carrying flashlights and walking along with the patrons and describing what was happening because of a giant puppet pageant going on as well. So there's a lot of different things that happen with description. It's expanding all the time. We have concerts, we have theater. I've worked with museums and different things like that. It's growing all the time. And to talk about Lolly's mention of IRA is expanding at a phenomenal pace. They are now, in some cases, in some cities, working with airports and transportation systems where I think you can use a subscription without any fees, because they're trying to expand that network. So again, it's something that's a game changer, and it's good because it's making everybody up their game, it's making everybody aware. So I welcome that because it's time. But again, with live theater, things move and things change, and sometimes you have technology that can't see to that part of the room or misses the person coming down the aisle behind you. So there is that give and take we need to find between the live and the technology, and things are going to keep expanding with Facebook feeds and where Facebook wants things described when they're doing live watching parties and things like that as well. So
great. I sincerely appreciate each of you for sharing with us today. We're going to go to questions here in just a minute, but I do want to mention that I did not ask people to talk about the Guthrie so much because there's a lot going on. But we do have audio description kits available that we loan out to arts organizations. And part of the idea is that I'm interested in sharing knowledge. I don't want, everything to be held inside. If we have resources, let's share those as well. In addition to the kits, we do have a Braille embosser here. So at a very reasonable rate, we offer Brailling services as well. And I just wanted to talk about some things that we've started to offer as well in terms of prep materials. And a lot of times when an audio describer comes to do a show, they'll take 15 minutes or 20 minutes before the performance begins, and they'll set the scene and give some descriptions about what people are about to see, what the stage looks like. But we've twisted that and turned that into notes that they present to us. And what it allows us to do is to send that out to patrons before they come. So, for example, if someone, they're not going to show up 15 minutes before the show. They may come just as the show starts. They have access to that same information beforehand. Or it's, that idea of being a visual learner, experiencing it on their own at their own time before they come and processing it ahead of time has worked out really well. And then that idea of programs, what we'll do is a couple weeks out before an audio described performance, I'll take the program we have, convert it to a Word document and send that out to patrons again, so you can take a look at that before you come in and have an opportunity to know what's in the program, since it can be difficult to work through that on the day of performance. We of course allow or have large print and Braille programs here in person. If anyone wants to take them home, they surely can, because we can make more. All right, I'm going to open up with questions, and I'm going to start with one, and then I'll pass it around, and we'll take anything here. Lally and Michael, just real quick question about what are some of the basic barriers that are frequently overlooked?
Well, I think creativity of mind. What environments might description be used in? And that's why I was trying to kind of cover a number of different possibilities, because we started here with the Guthries. We started with the arts, and it's expanded throughout the arts community. But I think now we're starting to really see it move out of this area into other areas. And I think this is one of the challenges that I think they find with IRA, is convincing people that you can use it for other things, that, trying to get them to think about what in your life would you want someone to do, where have you gone for help, to get help from a neighbor or family or a friend, that now all of a sudden the service is available, whether it's IRA or Be My Eyes, but it's there immediately where before it wasn't. And so getting people to think about creatively, what use cases can you think of that you might use description for, that you've never had the opportunity to use it before. So I think that's one of the barriers.
Sorry, I gotta figure out how to do that. So I guess your question is, what basic things were overlooked? Is that? You're right. So I think for me, it's not. Audio description is pretty good now, but if I go to a theater I've never been to, just having somebody, if it's possible, say, all right, well, here's your ticket. Here's how to go where you need to go next. Being able to have your desk attendants actually say, you need to turn around and take a right, and there's going to be a flight of stairs, those kinds of descriptions. It's not just about describing the show. It's about making sure that I know the environment well enough, and or offering assistance and maybe saying, would you like me to guide you? And know that the people might say no. No, you know what, I don't need to grab your arm. If you can just tell me, where's the elevator? And, I'm on the third balcony in the back. How do I get to that? I think, and granted, you have that for sighted people anyway. The difference is that usually ushers stand out in some way, and I'm not going to see that standing out way.
Can I just comment? One of the things that we've seen most frequently that's been is transportation. Because folks have to rely on a family member or a friend to get them there, or like Samantha said, you know, is the bus stop where I can be dropped accessible to the building. For instance, Metro Mobility, if your venue is not on the legitimate map, they will not drop somebody off. We had this with Fringe Festival where the front of the building was where they were mapped to, but the performance was actually behind the building on this side of the river, and they could not drop that individual off. So there's things to think about, which is like Michael said, is the building accessible? But also, so for instance, Mixed Blood does the Radical Hospitality, and they actually provide services for people to get to and from the venue, because they figured out that one of the obstacles was if for some reason Metro Mobility isn't able to pick you up and get you there on time, you either have to be there very early or you have to wait till they can get to you and pick you up. There are a couple of pilot programs right now that are trying to work. I think there's Mobility for All out of St. Paul. John Doe, who got a grant to try to develop kind of like an Uber for people who need a little bit more service. So if you call like iHail Cab, they have literally cabs where someone can roll their wheelchair up into the back of a cab. However, somebody who's using a walker, that doesn't work the same. They can't help them, they can't physically touch them, so there's liability issues. So there are limitations, and you kind of have to fall in these really specific parameters. And then there are also venues that really do consider themselves accessible, but they don't realize that somebody who's able-bodied can walk 10 feet to get into the building, but they have to go up 2 steps. And somebody who's using a walker has to go up like through a warehouse about almost like a quarter block to a block to get through, because they can't do that level. So it's not always just necessarily low vision or blindness. There's also sometimes other mitigating factors, and so there are different ways to counter that. But you need to think about that, like Michael said, when somebody gets in the space, telling them how to make their way around the space. And making sure your staff are trained that. Samantha, it was really great to hear all the different things you've done with your staff. For instance, Minnesota Fringe Festival has done that too, where they have brought in, and that's something that the certification process is going to cover that I forgot to mention. They're going to have a consultant track versus a describer track. So consultant could be somebody like those experienced users who can come in and give a venue or and a describer feedback about the description, and also tell them what works in the space. And I know when we had Minnesota Fringe, because they gave them the autonomy, the staff knew how to deal with the situation or figured it out, and they could really be very agile once they knew what their goal was and their ultimate thing was. So I think that's helpful.
All right, do we have any in-person questions here? Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, wow. Hi, my name's Tim. And I guess my question would be for Hunter and Michael. Michael, you mentioned having the program on the website as being a useful tool. And Hunter, you mentioned that you would convert the program to a Word document. Would a PDF would not work? Am I understanding that? Why the conversion, I guess is my question.
So if you go to adobe.com/accessibility, you can learn about how to create accessible PDF documents. But it is a process. And if you just take your program and run it through a scanner and generate a PDF that way, what you will have are images that screen readers cannot read. So, I mean, it could be PDF if you knew that your screen reader was properly reading the text. I maybe should have, ideally, if you could make your program HTML, which is what the web uses, then you're going to have the most accessible, well, or at least in theory, the most accessible thing that you can. The beauty with Word is that some people, i.e. me, have things that are a little bit like a Kindle, except that they display Braille characters. And so if I had a Word document or a properly prepared PDF, I could put this little, that file on my Kindle, and I could actually read it in Braille. It's not called a Kindle, but whatever. I could read it in Braille at the venue or at my leisure, you know, before I went to the show. And I wouldn't have to have a computer voice necessarily read it to me.
So Michael Valley's holding.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
And just to add to that, for what I'm doing is taking the PDF, the documents from the designers. But I use two things. First, I use that and changing it into Word because that becomes our large print program. And then I can build photos into that as well. And then I just take that and use that and send it to patrons using the audio description service. So I'm getting two things out of that conversion. And then we're just taking it away from it being a PDF and making it usable.
Hi, this is from Michael from Laurie. So I run a very small space. There's two of us who operate this whole business. And so I've been trying really hard. Laurie knows we've had a lot of conversations about how to make the space accessible at the time management level we're capable of. So as people who go to see shows and use audio description, like, what would get you to a venue significantly smaller than this wonderful building we're currently sitting in?
Well, the first thing would be the performance.
Always.
Always. And then I think one of the things about what we're talking about, no matter what form it takes, is that if you feel like there's an investment on the part of the people running whatever venue it is, then you're more likely to feel welcome. And it's not something you have to do, you have to comply with. It's something you want to do. You may have to comply with it, but it's not necessarily, that's not the reason that you do it. And I think that's one of the things that the Guthrie has done, is it is a welcoming experience. And so I think those things, and then making sure that whatever you do, again, going back to what Laurie said, that there's quality and consistency. Because if you try it and the description isn't good, people aren't going to come back. And I think this is a pretty sophisticated market because we've had it for a long time. And we do have gotten used to sort of our own style and all of that. But those would be the things I think of.
Yeah, the style thing is interesting, and just quality. I went to a book group the other week, and they were talking about seeing a movie that I was pretty sure would be audio described. And so the whole group was sighted people except for me. And I said, would you be willing to watch this with audio description? It'll be different for you, but it'll help me enjoy the movie more. And one of the people in the group said, I tried audio description and I liked it at first, but then the describer said the phone rang. I'm like, I'm not an idiot. I know the phone rang. I heard it ring. And so I quit using description. And then it really plays to the fact that there's amazingly awesome description out there. And there's description that isn't so great. And you can't usually just sit down and do it. I mean, when I was growing up and there was no description at all, family members would do it, but they lived with me or they were my friends and they kind of had a feel for, what I would want to know. But I would say, generally speaking, It's a real art form to be able to sit down and spontaneously say, all right, you know what, there's whatever it is, there's a room of 7 people and here's what the room looks like, and all that kind of thing.
Okay, I have a question. This is Cindy. So one comment, actually, that might help. I was had the pleasure of going to a play here at the Guthrie Lolly, and what I thought was fabulous was the tactile tour prior to the play. So we came early, we got to meet some of the audio describers, we got to touch the costumes. It was metamorphosis, so we could not quite go on the stage because it's a large body of water. But I thought that was really cool. And then we had a little lunch, and then we came back to the play. But I love that piece of it. I thought that was just amazing. So maybe ahead of time, and the actors had some of their costumes out. It was really delightful. My question is with Ira. I thought that I heard this, but now maybe not. Is it true that some of the larger retail establishments are offering Ira in their stores for free for shopping? And how do you find out about that?
They're trying to move toward that, but they've expanded it so exponentially I couldn't keep up. I was trying to follow them to find out more about it. So it does seem like they're really trying to go that route, but I haven't been able to keep up. I think you have to almost be a subscriber to know, and then also find out where they have their publicity.
You don't need to use, if you have the app, you can click on like deals and services or something. And it'll show you all of the places right now. I think Target does it. Walgreens, Thank You does it. I don't know. Those two stick out in my mind. If you're walking between Nicollet and 12th to Nicollet and how far, Laurie?
It's the home.
It's ways. You can use Ira on Nicollet now, and they're hoping to expand that. In just my own personal aside, I would love to see them get Nicollet and Hennepin, because then if you were a tourist, you would have what I would think of as the core of the downtown accessible to you. But again, not everybody has Ira, so it's great that we have talking street signs that'll tell you the name of the streets. I can't say enough good about the, I'm going to get the name wrong, but the Minneapolis ambassadors people that kind of wander around to see if anybody looks like they need help. Those guys are fantastic. And so, there's just a lot of ways that you can accommodate things if you are creative.
I think that a little bit about Ira, just to say what their approach is, that they're trying to bring on sometimes chains. So like we said, Walgreens is one of them, Wegmans in another part of the country is another chain of stores. They're kind of going after bigger companies to try and sort of build the free sites. And they're always adding new. Our airport is free. And so if you go, like Michael said, if you go on the app, there's a list you can access and you don't have to have a subscription to know that. They also have, I think they might have some of that listing on their website. And it changes, so it is hard to keep up with. But they have had lots of input from the community, the user community, that there are lots of folks who can't afford. This was a decision that they made when they created this company. They went for profit, knowing that their core community in large is not employed. And so now they're having to deal with that and figure out how do we bring new people in for those who maybe can't afford a subscription. So they have done these free sites. They now have a deal where the first 5 minutes of any call is free, and you can have as many of those a day as you want. If you go over 5, you start to spend minutes, and so that's where you need a subscription. But their cheapest subscription right now is $30. So yes, there are lots of people who can't afford it or for whatever reason don't want it. And so there are lots of other options, but I think that they are growing fast and they are trying to meet the needs of the community as they can. They don't have a perfect record. There's lots of places I think they fall down, but they do, I think, make a good effort at trying to make it work.
It's an interesting thing, Ira, and I like them. But again, I can't say enough that it's so important to me that people realize that as great as the technology is, not everybody's going to have it. So what I don't want to see happening is people getting to the point where they're like, oh, IRA exists, we don't have to do anything anymore. Because I think we're a long way away from that kind of adaptation. I do think it would be interesting to see if at some point IRA adopts some kind of a model where maybe you could set up a feed, and I don't know how I would feel if they actually did this, where a theater could buy into time, and so people could use IRA for free if they were going to watch a performance, and then somehow they would set up a video feed so that the person on the other end could describe it. It would be an interesting model. I don't know if we'll see it anytime soon, if they were to do something like that. But what's interesting is I can use IRA for free in a Target, and I've done it a couple of times, and it's liberating to be able to say, I want to pick up whatever and go and get it and have somebody help me find the checkout thing. But for me, at the end of the day, it's just way faster to grab somebody's arm and whip through the store and leave. And it's so great to have so many options. And again, by no means do I want to badmouth the service, because it's really amazing. But at the end of the day, there's sometimes where just having a person who can quickly give you some assistance is still a valuable thing.
Right, there's still pockets where the technology drops out, where it just doesn't, the network just doesn't work. And they really try to counteract that, but there's dead spots. And so if you can, and also with IRA, one thing you need to keep in mind is some theaters and some artists do not want IRA's using glasses that are picking up the visual images in the space. And so, and you have a person who's wherever they are in the United States is responding to that and is watching that live. And so somebody might have a problem with someone coming in with what they might think is a recording device if they recognize what they look like eyeglasses or sunglasses. Mm-hmm. But that's something to think about, that you may have somebody who has a problem. So that's where a live person can pretty much adapt pretty quickly, and you can have a live person the glasses are directional. So a live describer can pick up things that are in the space and people coming down the aisles and things like that, where the glasses would be wherever that person is basically facing. So there's pluses and minuses.
So one thing I would say, I think I'm all about options. I would not say that IRA is the answer for everyone. And certainly I agree with you, Michael. I've gone shopping with it. I've done it. I've decided I don't like shopping with it. So you find out by doing. You make your choices by experiencing. And there are reasons that I don't like shopping. And one of those is I can get done faster. But there definitely there are use cases for it. The thing about using them for performances, I actually don't like them for performances. And the reason is, and this goes back to talking about ASL interpreting. They have, over time, created specialties within the interpreter community. And so there are performance interpreters. I had the experience of taking my dog to the university for one of my dogs for a veterinary appointment, ran into a man who was a deaf resident. He had an interpreter that was trained in medical veterinary technology lingo. So there are specialties. And the thing about IRA, I think, and I've listened to them do performances when they've made special broadcasts available, they're not that good at it. When you have had good description for performance art, it is a different experience. And they shine really when in the areas where they're called upon to do something spontaneously, and they have the ability to kind of just come into a situation, whereas they did the Olympics when they were on, they did the Super Bowl, and a lot of people really liked it. I didn't find that it was as good had it been as it would have been if there was someone who was especially trained for that particular kind of situation. So I think that's another piece, is they're not going to be the be all and end all. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But what does happen is that they give people an option they couldn't have before.
Just a quick, almost non sequitur, but I think it needs to be mentioned because I don't think it's come up. You've heard about audio description, headphones, how awesome is it, and it is great. But I think we need to mention that there are people out there who love having amplified audio of performances. I actually used it for the first time seeing Bob Newhart. I was at Northrop and I thought, gee, I'm having trouble hearing him, but maybe it's just the way he's speaking. And somebody grabbed me an amplified audio unit and it made all the difference. So that's another service if you want to make yourself friendly, especially, again, as you get older, your vision goes, your hearing starts to deteriorate a little bit. And I just felt it should be mentioned because I don't think we've brought up that accommodation.
Right, and I think you make a great point. Something that's been coming up interestingly in the certification process is that with the boomer generation, we have a lot of people who don't necessarily always identify themselves as deaf or hard of hearing. My 80-something father he uses hearing aids, but he would never ever say he's hard of hearing or he's deaf. He just and so over time, I think we're going to see a lot of changes. The audio description is a moving thing where we have people who just assume that they're going to be using the service. They're not going to always necessarily identify when they order tickets from you or when they're coming to theater that they need access services. And it's something to be aware of that it's a moving thing. But as I'm encountering young people that I'm working with who use the services like the Minnesota State Academy for Blind, it's just an assumption on their part that those services are going to be there. And they just assume that they're going to walk into a venue and they'll have access. So it's an interesting kind of period of time right now.
Right. Another thing that maybe that hasn't been mentioned, but it's worth thinking about because a friend of mine was talking about it the other day, is how he doesn't want to necessarily, and this is getting technical to the point where maybe a lot of theaters won't be able to do it, but he doesn't want to have to choose between amplified audio or audio description. He wants to be able to get them both and to be able to change the volumes on them so that if he needs to focus more on the description, he can raise that up if he wants to do the volume. But there are people who both have a hearing impairment and want audio description. And there's so many variables. That's what makes working with disabilities both a challenge and an interesting place to be. There's definitely not a one-side. What Laurie wants in description might not be, I don't tend to care what people are wearing. She might like that a lot. I don't know. I'm just making that up. But what I care about might not be what she cares about. Might be completely different what person 3 wants. And so it's definitely an interesting balancing act. And, I might want audio, like I said, just the description. Someone else might want audio and description, and other people might just want amplified audio. Some people might be perfectly happy walking into a performance. When I go to see storytellers, it would never occur to me to ask for audio description, just because usually they're sitting there with a microphone. I watched a comedy show the other day on Netflix that they now describe all their content. And so this comedian did his thing and he audio described it. And the description was literally a fat middle-aged guy walks on stage and grabs a microphone. and he did his bit for half an hour. And then he picked up a glass of water, so they mentioned it. But I do think that as great as audio description is, it maybe doesn't need to be everywhere.
I want to echo a couple of points that were brought up here in the conversation. We are coming up on the end of our time, and I feel like we could stay here for another hour and keep this going. It's really, really great conversation. But some of just echoing their points and the ideas of that the accessibility work that we're talking about here is that it should be done because it's the right thing to do and then not because it's the law. But also the idea that's come up a few times along the way is this idea of building connections with the community and having that be a strong partnership, and that, that is a tool that can answer a lot of questions that come up. How do we do X, Y, and Z? I think one of the first things is how are we connecting with the community to help us answer X, Y, and Z. So keep that in mind. And then the idea that there's the importance of having shared experiences with family and friends to be able to do things with the people that you want to do them when you want to do them. All right. Thank you for making this a really great experience and conversation. And I just ask if you all join me in thanking the panelists up here today. Sorry, last thought, if we can make sure we do evaluations. I fully intended to have some documents to share with some resources. That didn't happen. I've added to the list as we've gone along today. So I will continue to gather that, and I'll share with everybody that we have connected with this event via email.
These are access services at NIA. If anyone wants to take the card.
And I've got business cards in case you want to know how I did this with no money.
Where are the events?
Yes, thank you.
I don't know.
I know.
That would be a Hunter question. I'm sorry. Where are the events?